In this video, we will discuss sending data to functions. As mentioned previously, the data sent to functions are called parameters. Most functions do take parameters and then perform calculations using that data. For example, we send a number to the square root function, and it sends us back the square root of that number. We'll start by looking at this version from the book that prints the lyrics to the Happy Birthday song. The happy function is used anytime we need to print Happy Birthday to you. That function doesn't need any parameters because it always does the same thing. In this example, we were singing Happy Birthday to two different people, Fred and Lucy. To keep the code more organized, two functions are used. Note that both functions are almost identical. The only difference is the name of the person. What we want is a single function that can sing Happy Birthday to anyone, so we don't need to write a separate function for every different name. This is done by adding a parameter to the function that indicates the name of the person. Here is the parameterized version. We still have our happy function that does not need any parameters, since it always does the same thing. But now we've written a sing function that takes one parameter. Parameter names must be legal identifiers. I chose person because it is descriptive of what the parameter represents. We put the parameters inside the parentheses for the function definition. In a function definition, we call these formal parameters. Now our sing function can use that parameter in place of hard coding in a person's name as the previous program did for Fred and Lucy. This allows our main function to ask the user to enter their name, and it will now sing Happy Birthday to that person. We see that when we call the sing function, we must place a value inside the parentheses for the call that indicates what data we are sending to the function. When calling the function, we call this the actual parameter. The way to remember this is that when you are actually calling a function, it is the actual parameter. When the function is called, the program pauses execution at the point as discussed before. Now Python adds the step of assigning the formal parameter to the value of the actual parameter. It's as if we had executed person equals name just before we started executing the function body. Note you do not need to write this assignment statement. Instead, Python automatically does this parameter assignment for you. Now we execute the body using the parameter, and when the function completes, it returns to the point at where it was called. Let's debug this so we can see how it works. I'll enter my name, and now we've stopped at the breakpoint. We'll step into the function and we can see that person holds my name. You'll also notice that we don't see the variable named name from the main function. Inside a function, you can only use any parameters and any new variables you create. That statement isn't quite true, as Python supports global variable names, but it is generally bad practice to use global variables, and there's rarely a need to use them, so we will ignore them for now. There are no assignment statements to create new variables in our sing function, so the only variable we can use is the parameter person. In PyCharm, you can see how we got to the sing function. In the frames view, we see that at the file or module level, we called the main function from line 14. From within the main function at line 12, we called the sing function, and now we're currently ready to execute line 5. If we click on the main function in the frames view, there we can see that the main function has a variable named name. And if we click back on the sing function, we can tell that person was assigned the actual parameter since it holds the same value. We'll now step into the happy function. You'll notice that the frames view added a level as now we're at line 2 in the happy function, which we got to from line 5 of the sing function, which we got to from line 12 of the main function, which we got to from line 14 of the file. This is how Python keeps track of where to go back when the sing function completes. We'll step over the print statement, and now we're back in the sing function. Note that person still has the same value as it did before we called the happy function. We'll press step into to complete the execution of the first call to the happy function. I could have pressed step over to complete the call, as either one will complete the execution of a function call when we get back to the line where the function was called. Note the frames view removed the top item, which was the call to the happy that we just completed. We'll press step into again, and now we're in the happy function again, as we can see in the frames view. We're at line 2 of the happy function again, but this time we can see that we got to here from line 6 of the sing function, so when this call completes, we'll continue after that. We'll press step over to execute the print function and exit the happy function, and then step over again to complete line 6. We'll press step over again, and it prints out the line that sings Happy Birthday to the name that we typed in. Notice the use of string concatenation so we don't get a space between the person's name and the period. This time I'll use step over, as we know how the happy function works, so there's no need to step into it again. We see it output the final Happy Birthday line, and now we can press step over again to complete line 12. And now we're back ready to complete line 14. Note that our frames view removed the main function as we are completing it. We'll press step over one more time to complete it, and the program ends since there's no code after line 14 of the file. This version shows that we do need to send variables you want to use in a function as parameters. You cannot access a variable created in one function in a different function unless you pass it as a parameter. Here I've tried to use the name variable from the main function inside the sing function. You can see PyCharm underlined in red the use of the name in the sing function, indicating it thinks something is wrong. Occasionally I've seen PyCharm underline something in red even when it is correct. So if you think the code is correct, go ahead and try it. We'll run this and see that it starts to work okay as we see the first two happy birthday lines output. But when it tries to execute line 7, it crashes because it does not know what name is, since there is no variable or parameter named name inside the sing function. Note that this crash shows us what was in the frames view. This is known as the stack trace or traceback. We see that from line 14 we called the main function, and at line 12 we called the sing function, and then at line 7 in the sing function it crashed with a name error. We can also use the PyCharm inspect option to see that this is a mistake. It shows us that there is no variable named name in the sing function, and it also tells us that we did not use the variable named name in the main function. We assigned it, but then we never did anything with it, so PyCharm is telling us that variable is unused. Unused variables are usually an indicator that you've done something wrong, as there was no point in creating the variable if you weren't going to do something with it. We can fix this by putting name as the formal parameter for the sing function, and then passing name as the actual parameter in the main function. As this shows, the formal and actual parameters can be the same identifier, but they are still two distinct values. We are not accessing the name from the main function inside the sing function. We have passed the name variable from the main function to a formal parameter also named to name in the sing function, and we are using it on line 7. The previous version we looked at used a different identifier for the formal and actual parameters, which is also allowed and makes it more clear that they are two separate values.